This, just FYI for those that need continuing education units, this session is not eligible for that, for the Utah licenses, but if you have an out-of-state license that you would like to use this for CEUs, come up here and we have some certificates for that. A couple of other items. The first item on the agenda this morning is a safety award presentation, and as in the past, we've done this for the contractor with the highest safety score, and that safety score, for those that may not know, is the monthly inspections that our safety professionals go out onto jobs and do, and those with the highest score overall. There was a minimum number of visits that needed to be accomplished for that to be able to be eligible for the award, and that was 10. So if you had less than that, then you weren't eligible for the award. But 10 and over, you're eligible for the award. And we'll turn some time over now to Shane to go ahead and present that.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. There are a few things in my job that I love. Getting up and standing in front of all you is not one of them. But giving an award like this is a pretty cool award. We really do value safety at the organization. And I know that there are times when you see some of our specs and you say, yeah, right. You value safety, You want me to be out there when and how long? But we really do. And we're trying to swing that way. But we're going to need your help. We need your help to help us swing back a bit and say, you know what, we just can't get that done in that time frame safely. And we need to hear those comments back, and we're very open to hearing them. But we're a big organization, and that pendulum swings very, very slowly. So give us some time. We'll work our way back to where we're much more reasonable than we have been in the past, and we'll get there. I promise you that. We'll get there. So it is my pleasure to give the Safety Award this year to W.W. Clyde for their outstanding performance and significant contributions in project safety. Done? Any questions for me before I leave? Please say no. Go ahead.
I think they have the lights down in here so they can't see how old we're all getting. That's not a bad thing. Just a couple of announcements before we start. As part of an agreement with FHWA, and those of you who sat through a few of the sessions yesterday, we talked about this. In an effort to try to minimize the number of ped ramps that are torn out, we have come into agreement with FHWA, and if as part of that agreement, we're going to give them a 2-week period to be able to come in and inspect ped ramps past the final inspection. And then if they don't come in with that 2 weeks, that means that they accept that, and so they can't come back a month later and ask us to tear those out. And as part of that, we're required, both contracting folks and UDOT folks, to go through a training. So you'll be hearing about that coming up. Russ Scoville from our Traffic and Safety Division will be setting those up, and so look for those coming up prior to next construction season. In January is when we're looking at doing that. The other thing that we wanted to emphasize is partnering phase 1 and 2 are mandatory. And that's for all project personnel. So please make sure you've got that, and up to, if you haven't noticed this, up to $25,000 of the mobilization payment can be withheld. Now it's not gone, but it's withheld until those folks actually go and do the training. So that's how serious we are about that partnering training. All right, what have we been doing the last year? My plan for today, and I'll give you a roadmap for today, I'm going to present for 10 minutes or so here, and then we're going to open it up for questions. This is a question and answer period. This isn't a Rob gets up and presents for an hour and a half, because I think you guys would all fall asleep. So I encourage very much the discussion. We've got our fine panelists up here that can answer your questions, and we've got a lot of knowledge in this room. It's interesting, I go around the country, and when in past years I'd heard Carlos or John or Shane get up and talk about what a wonderful thing we've got going here with our contractors and the relationship between UDOT and the contractors, and I didn't believe that as much as I do now because I've seen it. I've been to other states, I've been to other DOTs, and the adversarial relationship that I see in some states is pretty amazing. It's unbelievable that people would want to work that way. And I don't know, some of you do work in other states and may have seen that, but so I guess the first thing I want to say is thank you for that. And I think we've got a ways to go, and we're not done working on that, and we need to continue to work on that, but we've come a long way from how it was maybe 15, 20 years ago, and we want to continue that. So in that light, UDOT and AGC, for those of you who may not know, the Heavy Highway Group meets monthly, and those meetings I think are very beneficial, and we come up with many things that we need work on, and we put together task groups, and these are some of the things that we've been working on for the past year and a half, and some of them up to 2 years. One of the things we've heard in the last year especially is the issues with price plus time and what that's doing to some of our relationships and impacting projects. And so we put together a working group, and I'll talk in a few minutes about that. Second thing, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, that actually came up in this meeting was how important work zone safety was, and there was a concern expressed, and we absolutely heard that message, and that's going to be a top priority of ours going forward. I don't see that ever being put on the back burner. We're going to talk a little bit about the status of e-construction and what that means to the contracting community. We'll talk a little bit about future funding, and then quality improvements. So we got a working group put together to explore price plus time, and one of the first things we determined that price plus time may not be the biggest issue. Probably more important is what we heard from the contracting folks on that committee was the work windows and how difficult the work windows were getting to be because of the compressed work windows, and how difficult that is when you've only got 6 hours of a work window. How much that slows down a project, and how much additional cost that brings to the project. The other thing that we did hear about the T was sometimes that T, the max days are not enough to build the project based on curing times, other lead times. There may not be enough time in there to build the project. The third thing we saw was that it creates adversarial relationships. That time is something that's always in everybody's mind. Anytime there's a change, anytime that there's something that comes up, that time, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here. You guys all are very familiar with that. And then another thing we heard was some decisions are being made based on time, and they don't lead to the best quality on a project. For the example of the chip seal, where you've got rain forecast, maybe a 40% chance of rain, 50% chance of rain, but it's a 30-day contract, and you really got to get out there and chance it. And that's not in the department or in the contractor's best interest, definitely. And then utility companies were also brought up as a concern because of the scheduling. Here are some of the solutions that the group came up with. One of them is UDOT estimators review all projects for constructability related to time. I think we've been pretty good in the past few years of getting a better look at constructability, but part of that constructability needs to be an analysis of the time. And so definitely something we need to have and keep our eye on. Second thing is more working day contracts. Kind of pull that struggle of calendar days out, and so that if there's a weather day, if there's something where you can't work and it's in the best interest of the department and the contractor to not work, let's not force ourselves to do that. The other is a new work window process that balances mobility, safety, and quality. That's something on the UDOT side. We've had a transportation management plan policy for many years. We haven't been following it, but it's a look at everything in the pre-construction process and the design process where we not only look at mobility. I think mobility has been the king for many, many years, and it will continue to be an important part of our projects. But let's balance out the cost of construction and quality and safety and make sure all those things are considered going into it. And the idea here is we want to make better decisions overall, not just clamp those work windows down, but look at the costs associated with that and what that does to the other aspects of a project besides mobility. The other thing is performance-based traffic specification, and in some cases that may mean kind of a poor boy performance-based traffic specification where essentially the contractor doesn't necessarily need to do a traffic study, but you would give some flexibility to the work window. You'd have a set work window, but you would be able to expand that on a trial and error basis with the approval of the resident engineer. So you have some flexibility there. I know it's in some cases we've seen that some REs have been doing this, but we want to make sure it's in contract so that you know that up front that this is going to be the case. For example, say your work window goes from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. Okay, you're noticing that at 9 o'clock there's hardly any traffic, and so you get with the RE and say, hey, the spec allows us to try closing this an hour earlier. Let's give it a try and see how it works. Okay, you try it one night, it works fine. You're still under contract, that's still according to contract, but you don't have to do a $20,000 traffic study to figure that out. So that's one of the things with performance-based traffic control that we're going to see coming up. The other thing is to get a notification for utility companies at advertising. This is something Richard Manser has worked with our utility folks, and we actually have an admin rule now that encourages us to do certain things, but we also have some teeth now if the utility companies don't play ball with us. And we're still figuring out what process that's going to be, but that's a step in the right direction. We've never had this before, and as long as we do our part, the utility company is held to the schedules that they give us at the start of a project. Work zone safety, some of these we've worked on in the past couple of years. The uniformed officer policy, encouraging the use of more officers. There's nothing that slows down traffic like the red and blues. Second, a revised work zone speed limit policy. Josh Van Jura and our folks down in traffic and safety worked hard to revise the work zone speed limit policy to allow significant drops in speed. We've seen going from 80 miles per hour on some of our rural interstates down to 45, right where the workers are present. And I think that's made a huge difference. And what we're seeing so far on the projects that we've done this on is we're seeing that the public is following those speed limits fairly close. We're getting good speed compliance, good speed harmonization, and I think that, rather than going 80 right through where workers are present, 45 makes a big difference. And we're really excited about some of the things that are going on there. Going kind of hand in hand with that is variable speed limits in construction. Those trailers make it pretty easy to lower that speed limit just in the section where workers are present. The idea here is to train the public to obey those speed limits if they know it's only happening in where workers are present and for a fairly short or relatively short distance. And then portable rumble strips. Portable rumble strips aren't the panacea. They don't fix everything, and they're not the choice for every project, but definitely they do have their use, and they do get people's attention. In today's world where we see a lot of people texting, a lot of people talking on their phones while they're driving, that rumble can really make a big difference and wake people up. Hey, you're coming into a work zone, something's different here. Transportation funding, where does it come from? This is just kind of a piece of the pie, and this is general big picture stuff. Our federal funding, as you know, and Rich is very tied into the national scene on this, but we don't see that changing significantly, but that's only 24% of our total funding at UDOT. Our transportation fund, that's what funds our operations and our maintenance folks and everything. And then there's the TIF fund, which is our widening. Those are bigger projects, generally speaking. As some of them are bigger, obviously, some of them are not. But so what's interesting is that this is very unique in the nation. We're seeing a few states that are getting more and more state funded, but we don't see that federal funding changing significantly over the coming years. I think the states are more and more going to looking at funding this. And the thing that's unique about Utah is not only the percentage of federal funding, but also that there's a dedicated source for our funding, and that's an ongoing source year after year after year. And then here's where we are. One of the questions that always comes up is there going to be bonding? Is this the year? And this is out of that TIF money. Here's what's currently happening. 233 million of that is going to projects, and then 339 million is going to bond payments. And so we're still paying down those bonds, but at the time when those bonds do get paid down, we're going to be seeing a bigger increase in money that we'll be able to use for projects. I wanted to show you this, and you probably can't read it real well, but this is a list, and this is on our website. It's the TIF Fund Capacity Program Recommendations. And if you want to get on our site and just search under TIF Capacity Program, you'll pull this up. That's probably the easiest way. We're programmed out to 2022. There's 3 years that actually we have the funding. The others are coming, but there's a list of those projects, those that go after these big projects. This would be of interest to you, but something you can pull up on the site. And I think there's a slide I missed, but the other thing that I would point you towards is the construction marketing report, and that lists all projects that are going to advertise, I believe, in the next 6 months is what it is. So you can get in there and look at those, and those are all kinds of projects, the small projects and the big ones. So those are the two sources you can go to for that. The last thing I did want to talk about was quality improvements as far as our process. We all agree that what UDOT has, we have a lot of process, we have a lot of paperwork, and one of the things that we're looking at, our group in central construction and hopefully statewide, is looking at ways to reduce the amount of extra steps that we need to go through to build projects. Because in the end, that end product is what we're looking for. The paperwork in some cases actually helps with the quality or verifies the quality of that. But if there's a way that we can do the same thing with less steps, less hassle, that's the way we're going to go. One of these is HIC rosters. And for years and years, we've thought it was a requirement that we had to have HIC rosters turned in and compare that with certified payroll. Several of us upstairs started looking at that, and I know Robert Stewart was a big proponent of this. And we actually pulled out the federal law and reread it, and we found that that's not necessarily what the law says. We just assumed that was how we were going to take care of it. As of what's the date here? Anything advertised after August 22nd no longer needs to have our HIC roster collection on the project. We're going to do it on a programmatic basis, where when the contractor certifies every year, they will certify that they are doing the harassment, intimidation, and coercion training. So I see that as saving hundreds of hours on projects of administrative problems, and the more that we can do with that, the more our folks can concentrate on these main things: safety, quality, and cost, and making sure we're getting the job done. So that's one example of the several things that we're looking at with this e-construction effort. We are looking at consolidating processes and not just automating a process that's pretty bad, but we're trying to improve that process before we automate it. On e-construction, I think there's probably more to come on the contractor side, but I think just generally speaking, it's electronic submittal of certifications, electronic change order processes. Those are some of the things that are going to definitely impact our contracting community. We'll be working through that, and we'll be asking some of your folks to come in and do some beta testing on some of the stuff that we're doing within the next year or so, and make sure that we've got it down right before we turn it loose on all projects. But we are going to be working hand in hand with members of the AGC to make sure that happens. Are there any questions before we go into, I've got a few canned questions, but are there any questions on any of the things? I've kind of covered those pretty quick. Is there anything that you want to talk about with those particular items that I've brought up so far? It's pretty early in the morning. Yes.
Is your development of the e-construction, is that going to also apply to alternative delivery projects?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Separate processes?
The idea is that we don't want to have a separate process for our typical projects and then for our design builds. We want to have the same process. And so every large design build project doesn't need to create its own system. We have the system already in place, you just use it. The idea is we want all projects to function in the same manner, because that data that we get from design build projects is important data, and it's good information, and we want a similar process. And so that's really what's driving this. And yes, we will do it on all projects and the same system. Any other comments on that? Okay, now it's time for open questions. First question, and we've got this panel up here with many years of knowledge and experience to answer those questions. What things would improve the partnering environment on projects? Yeah, that's hard. I guess it's pretty early in the morning, though.
The only question that I'm continuing to have contractors come to me when we're doing some of our training is still the issue with consultant-managed projects. We're still struggling with, and it's not that they're not talented and they're not qualified, but the way that we're challenged with either their liability issues or whatever the issues are. Right now, the process seems to not be working because I'm still hearing the same complaints that we are really struggling, and the contractors that are approaching me are to the point where they're really frustrated. So I don't know how to fix it because I don't know what all of the internal processes are. So.
Thank you. Good question. We do have several consultants in here. It'd be a good time to bring this up and talk about this. Does any of the panel want to add to that?
I guess since I'm first in the row.
Would you?
Sure. I think there's a couple of efforts that we've tried to kick off in the last year and really encourage the crews to focus on. And it's more reality-based, more troubleshooting, taking that risk register that was developed in the pre-construction, moving that forward through construction and getting contractor input. And if that's the core of the partnering kickoff meeting in the pre-construction, that will help that problem-solving nature that we all have. It starts developing that relationship. It starts to identify those issues that can be tracked and retired and resolved as they go on in the life of a project. Another one that Josh and Rob and I have all been talking about recently is looking at the size of a job, the complexity of a project, the risk for escalation of items, and if there should be an executive partnering level, and if that should be identified at the pre-construction and at the partnering kickoff, and identify who those members are. And maybe that's just a monthly touch basis. So you're getting together once a month with the executives of that company, the higher ups within the region, and they're having a conversation of how are the things working out on the project. So you can address if there's a personality conflict, if there's an actual issue that needs to be escalated, that maybe people for pride reasons haven't wanted to escalate it and it's been delayed. So there's a lot of, I'm going to say, intangibles that can lead to someone feeling that a job is not being partnered well, and it's really identifying and communicating those early.
Personally, I think the biggest issue with partnering in the past has been due to price plus time. And I think we've made some great strides in improving that, and we'll have to see if that improves the partnering process. But I think this ties into the consultant managed projects too, because they don't feel like they have the flexibility to mess with those timeframes for the work windows. Unlike a UDOT-RE seems to be able to grant a little more flexibility. By putting that flexibility into the spec, I think that's going to drastically improve things. I also think that, you know, UDOT can sometimes be a lot harder on UDOT consultants than their own REs sometimes, and that I think is you know, that can create some issues as well. So the second guessing of a consultant RE, you know, and having them come back and have to change their position on things is sometimes a big concern.
Yeah, I think one thing that has been working well is these predetermined risk registers, as Michelle put it. You know, put everything out on the table in that pre-construction meeting. And, you know, when we've seen that done, I know we had one down in Region 3 a couple years ago. You know, very highly sensitive, traffic sensitive project, and get the DEs, get everybody's involvement up front. You know, if the DEs have buy-in, the consultant REs are going to have buy-in, as well as the UDOT REs. There isn't that fear factor there. It's like, hey, here's what we're up against. Here's what we're faced with. Let's get all levels together in one meeting. I know everybody's busy, but I think on these projects, if you do that, they've seemed to have gone much, much better.
I think along with the risk registers, assigning contingency money to those items, you know, as UDOT identifies those in the planning process, some of the challenge that we have is we get to those items that we've identified as risk in a project and there's just no budget for it. And so I think something, you know, where we're planning or UDOT's planning for some of those challenges in advance, assigning budget dollars to those can help the project teams use that budget to, you know, to accomplish, you know, whatever needs to be done in overcoming that. And so I think that's kind of a next step thing, and I do think the risk registers are a good thing, and that may be another way to take it to the next level there.
Any of our consultant REs want to comment on that?
Well, we started a committee just for this very reason. And we had a lot of involvement right off the bat from both sides, and it's kind of dwindled, I mean, to the point where we don't even really meet. So I really encourage, if that's really still the case, you know, please come to these meetings or send somebody with issues, or let anybody on this panel know that you have an issue, and we'll work it out. Because I thought that we started working on some really good things to get past that. So.
I think what Brandon mentioned, I think writing the spec that allows for judgment of the RE is a good thing, and then helping have the consultant RE understand that, and supporting through executive help, whether that's DE, whether that's, you know, whoever is managing that particular contract with the consultant RE, to help them understand that there is some judgment that can go on then, and backing those up and having those discussions, and most of all, the communication. I think the communication with the consultant RE, you know, 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when we started hiring consultants, we didn't really know how to do that. I think over the years, I think we've done some good things, and then there's still some ways to go on communicating needs between UDOT and the consultants. Any other thoughts on consultant REs? I figured we'd get Scott to speak up here.
You know, to Renee's point, my observation, and there are pockets of, or instances of, I think, really good partnering and crews that do a good job. I feel like we're at a point now where I don't feel a big difference between consultant and UDOT crews. I think that it's getting tougher across the board. I'd be interested to know if that's a general consensus or just my experience. But I'm seeing more and more small issues getting escalated. So there seems to be an inability to make decisions at the lowest level, which is kind of one of the core principles of partnering. And I ask myself, well, what's causing that? And a lot of times it's just this inability. Rob mentioned, allowing the RE to use judgment and so forth. But generally, I think what we see is nobody will make a decision and use judgment. I shouldn't say nobody, but less and less frequently, anybody's willing to make a judgment, and it's always blamed on, well, the feds will never let us do that. The feds will take our funding. And I don't know if that's just used as kind of a shield to deflect, the responsibility, but we hear that more and more frequently. And another thing that I think causes this is the specification, in my opinion, is becoming more and more one-sided and more punitive. There's 1,000 ways to fail under the specification, but like 5 ways to win. For instance, there's no limit on liquidated damages for being late, but there's always a limit on how many days bonus you can get, if you can even get bonus. In asphalt paving, you can bonus $3 a ton, you can be penalized $35 a ton. MSE retaining walls, you can get down to a 60% pay factor, but you can't get above 100% pay factor. And those pay factors are scattered more and more throughout the specification now, where there's a lot of areas to get penalized financially based on quality. It's not necessarily a bad thing. The idea is to improve quality, but it's put the contractors in a situation where they're getting hammered more and more and getting hit in the pocketbook, and that creates, it may or may not be right or wrong, but it creates difficult relationships on the project. A few observations.
Thanks, Scott. Any other thoughts? Other issues that are causing struggles with partnering on projects? I know we've got a lot of people, their brains are spinning here. What other thoughts? Share them with us.
We do a lot of smaller projects, and so there's a tendency to get a little bit of a smaller contractor working on those, and even so, we typically see the prime pretty dialed in to what has to happen on a UDOT project. And so normally I don't feel like we have a very poor relationship partnering-wise with the prime, but it seems like that often means some of the subs that we get are not at all dialed in to a UDOT-style project. And so typically it seems like the challenges that we've seen have risen more from the subs not really being on board with the partnering process. And I don't know if that's an across-the-board issue. I'm curious to hear input that way, or if that's just something that you struggle with on smaller projects. But really getting the buy-in from a sub that has a relatively small portion of the work, but within also a small project, it's a small time window. And just as a sidebar, I appreciate the flexibility that we're infusing with more working day contracts, because that really puts the hurt on a sub that has only so much time to get some concrete flat work in, and he's going to have to take the risk on rain or not and those kinds of things.
I would agree with that. I mean, most of our issues as a prime are with our smaller subs, gathering their paperwork, making sure their information's submitted. It's can be a frustration to us, because as Scott mentioned, there's more and more penalties, and for us to get a penalty on a sub because of a sub, but it is our job to manage these guys, and so I guess the only thing I can say is I agree with you that those are a lot of the issues. I don't know as far as a way to fix it, though.
You know, one idea is to maybe put on a course for subs that they're required to go to, like a UDOT 101 course that Professor Van Jura teaches, and you know, something like that would help those subs understand what the expectation is, because I think a lot of them come into the job not knowing, and you know, we're not the greatest communicators in the world either, and so we rely on the spec to inform them, and that's not, you know, very often maybe they haven't read the spec. And so I think the more we can do to educate them, the better.
Yeah, I can say one thing that we have implemented over about 3 years ago is we will, prior to job startup, bring the subs in, make sure they understand our contract language. Safety expectations, that's the one we always seem to have a problem with, you know, don't show up in shorts and whatnot. But it has helped to some degree. The paperwork, I agree with Dustin, Brandon, Scott, everybody here that is the hang up. I mean, that tends to bring tension between UDOT and subconsultant REs. That's always the lingering paperwork that goes on, and how to combat that, you know, all we can do is hold their money, but even that is sometimes often doesn't work.
I did fail to introduce the esteemed panel before we started. I apologize for that. We just assumed everybody knows everybody, but that may not be the case. This is Michelle Page, our state construction engineer, Brandon Squire with Ralph L. Wadsworth, who's our chair of our Heavy Highway Committee with AGC, Eric Wells, who's with Granite Construction. He's on UDOT Standards Committee. I found that that's fairly unique with Utah DOT, of having a member of the AGC on our Standards Committee. So if there's any issues, problems with the standards, he's your contact guy. Eric loves that too, by the way. Everything funnels through him. And then we have Dustin Olson from WW Clyde. And Dustin has been a stand-up guy on many of these committees that we've been discussing today to help improve processes within UDOT. So apologize for not doing that earlier.
Rob, on the subcontractor issue, just so everybody realizes, this is not new. When we started doing partnering in Arizona, this was identified as one of the biggest issues that we have. And nationwide, we still run into the same issues. And some of the things that we're trying to get the GC to do is to maybe, within their own subcontract agreements, add in that partnering piece, that they have to be in attendance, assuming that they have a big role. I mean, I'm not worried about my guardrail guys and my stripers. They're at the end of the job. They're there if they come to the workshop at the beginning. And a lot of these guys where we've had a problem is they're really small. And I end up with the president of the company sitting around the partnering workshop going, why the heck am I here? But he's not really working on the job. And so the other issue that we've had is they'll send the guys that really aren't going to be involved, to that partnering workshop. So the general contractor, because there's no contractual relationship with UDOT, really needs to kind of step up and say, hey, look, guys, we're required to do this, so we are going to require you to do this. So look at your contracts with your subs and see if there's an opportunity for them to, or write in a partnering aspect that says you need to engage, you need to be there. So that's one opportunity, but this is something that we've been struggling with because there's that contractual issue. And a lot of general contractors are just frustrated. So you're not alone here. It is a national issue. And maybe, Rich, that's something through the AGC that you guys can come up with a way to integrate and make them a part of it.
Thanks. I know sometimes the guardrail actually in the striper, the striping contractors with P+T, that puts a lot of pressure on them to be, the last ones, yeah, right, because the last one to get out there has a lot of pressure and risk on them. Other thoughts on partnering? Partnering environment, anything?
Maybe just one more on the subcontractors. We're really good at doing pre-activity meetings, but we're not necessarily the best at doing interim or at completion of an activity, talking about the lessons learned or any issues that still remain on an item. And that's one way where we can definitely involve those subcontractors, have them attend that weekly meeting and be part of that discussion. I know sometimes there's so many other issues on a project that we're focused on what the prime issues are, and we're not always looking at all of those subcontractor issues. So I would just maybe add those other two steps to it. 90% of this comes down to communication and having a process where that communication can be exchanged.
Okay, let's move to the next question. Do you feel the changes that, and I say when we, I mean all of us, UDOT, AGC, contractors, have made in the past 2 years that have improved safety on projects? Are we heading the right direction? Have things changed out there from the way they were a few years ago? Any thoughts on that? Or suggestions that you have maybe to take, what's the next step? What are the next steps? What are the things? One of the big focuses was trying to decrease the speed through work zones.
So we had the opportunity this construction season to try out the variable speed limit signs on our Beaver Passing Lanes project on I-15, and I was impressed with the ease of use there. I do feel like, you know, we certainly still have the people doing, you know, somebody was pulled over doing 105 through our project, but for the most part, I do feel like it's helping, and you know, I think it's improving the safety within the work zone. I feel like you know, you're always going to have the person on their phone going way too fast, and it won't solve that, but it does overall, I think, slow people down. And frankly, the trailers worked great, and you know, I got really good feedback from the team on that. And so I feel like it is. I think anything we can do to improve work zone safety is critical. We're in an extremely competitive industry. We're really struggling to attract and retain people within the industry. And you know, the safer we make them feel in their work environment, the better off we're going to be.
Other thoughts? Ideas?
I think an increased use of highway patrol on the projects seems to help. It's been, I think, fairly widely agreed that having them sit there on the project with their lights on is good, but enforcement is better. So if people see cars pulled over in the work zone, that sends a stronger message than a vehicle that's parked in the same place every day and never moves, and at some point, after a while, it loses its effect. So I generally think that more highway patrol is good, but I think the department should step up and just pay for all the hours and make it a bid item or just pay it directly. I think there's still some sort of gamesmanship over either not making it a pay item and putting it under like lump sum traffic control, so we have to guess at how much to put in or how much is the other guy going to put in and things like that, or we'll pay for half the hours up to so much. And you know, I just think that if it's an improvement and it helps, then pay for it and make it an item and don't play games with it.
Can I talk for just 1 second about that, Scott? So the uniformed officer policy that came out, we talked a lot about that, and the policy actually says UDOT will pay for all the hours up to a designated amount, because let's be honest, we're paying for them anyways, right? And there was actually incentive to not use them was one theory, because if it was half of those hours were within mobilization or traffic control or wherever, there was actually motivation to not use them because that could be turned into profit. And we were paying for them anyways. So the new policy actually recommends, and again, it's a recommendation, that UDOT just reimburse 100% up to a designated number of hours. We did need to take a guesstimate of what those number of hours were. Obviously not knowing the traffic control plan, but for budgetary purposes, we had to set a number. It also says, you contractor, if this isn't enough, day one, contact your RE and see if there's additional budget to support more UHP hours out there. So I think hopefully we're bidding contracts that way. The uniformed officer policy is pretty new. I think it was just published, I want to say June or July. So it is relatively new, but again, 100% reimbursement, encourage the use. It is not a bid item. There is a way through the existing accounting system just to reimburse the contractor directly at, I don't know, what's the rate, $50 or $60 an hour? 50. Anyways, to just reimburse that full rate, because I know generally it's preferred that as the prime you coordinate directly with UHP. We can directly pay them, but it's easier. They actually prefer to be invoiced by the contractors, at least Lieutenant Nybor, who I spoke with and worked closely with here out of the Salt Lake district. That was his preference, but yeah, full reimbursement, show us the invoice.
But you don't have to put the money in your lump sum.
No, nope, it's paid like a material incentive, just under that, is it detail 90 or, yeah. Whatever the detail group for incentives adjustments is, it's just paid 100% through that.
What I just heard though is it's recommended, right? Why is it not a shall, right? Why is it not required? So I mean, I hear what Scott's saying. He's saying we don't know. Sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's the other way. And it seems like a recommendation. Then do it.
If I had my druthers, I would have gotten a shall in an effort to get this through the different regions and the many people that we contacted through that.
It's just a word change.
Not as big as you. No, and I think moving forward, that's how it will be in the 1554S spec that says the department has allocated whatever, 500, 2,000, whatever hours for UHP usage and will be reimbursed at 100% pay via the adjustments detail. Because again, let's be honest, we were paying for it anyways. Let's just pay for it 100% and use it. But we did have to take a crack at that total number of hours for budgetary purposes, but that's negotiable too.
Just throwing out one of the things, I've good friends in Texas have come up with a safety contingency on every project where they just have a pot of money that's set aside specifically for safety items such as this. Say you come out to the bid and you have a contractor on board, you overrun the hours that were allocated for highway patrol. This money is set aside specifically for safety. There's no argument. There's no, hey, we can't afford that. It's just set aside for safety. They initiated this, Russell, 2 years ago? And we've kind of been keeping tabs on that to see how that works, but safety should never be something that we have to, hey, we can't afford that, because we can always afford safety. And that just took that whole discussion and argument out of the picture and said, we have money set aside for this. So if you got things like positive protection, you got things like highway patrol that's needed in the project, we're looking at that as another possibility to, again, improve the safety performance on our projects.
I would also encourage, technology is dramatically improving in this area. And so as you work or travel throughout the U.S., if you see something, talk to Josh. He's very open to trying new things. I think Oldcastle Group created a system that has some great potential. There's probably some other things that throughout the U.S. that are being tried out. So if you hear of things or if you see things, bring these items up and let's give them a try.
Absolutely. Brian's being a little bit humble there, but that Oldcastle system, that AWARE system, is pretty impressive. I've heard many DOT folks say that this is a game changer. This is something that will improve safety dramatically, and essentially what it is, just kind of to give a big picture overview of it, it uses military technology to track vehicles coming into the work zone. So you have a stray vehicle that's coming in at an odd angle at a high speed, and every worker has a unit on their person that will vibrate and send off a high-pitched squeal. You can't, this thing's really loud. We woke up a lot of folks in Arkansas when we were doing this down in the middle in downtown Little Rock. But anyway, it alerts them that a vehicle is headed their direction, and that gives them at least a few seconds to get out of the way. I know work zone intrusion alarms in the past have had a lot of false positives, and so people stopped using them. This thing is very impressive, and looking forward to seeing what's the next step and how to get that more and more into our work zones. So definitely there's some things out there with technology that can definitely give our folks out there a fighting chance to get out of the way when we do have an errant vehicle in the work zone. Doing pretty good on time. Okay. Rich, do you have anything to add to that? Rich has been very quiet over here. He's dreaming of Disneyland, so. All right. Last question that I have listed, and then we can bring up anything that you guys want to talk about. What challenges are you having with price plus time and work windows? I thought Sydney was raising her hand there, stretching. Are we still seeing a lot of projects that come out with the max days not really corresponding with the amount of time that it takes to build the project? Are you seeing that? Everything's just going great, huh? I think we will. Any thoughts?
I think in a competitive industry that we definitely are sometimes our own worst enemies here, right? I mean, we definitely push hard. All of us are competing for, limited amount of work, and sometimes that creates us to be pretty aggressive in our bidding, especially on time. And so I think that it's certainly an item that relates to the partnering. We definitely have a lot of challenge on projects that have legitimate issues trying to get more days. There's really almost a no tolerance policy on that. And it's becoming harder and harder to discuss those days, even with a solid schedule. And you get into the discussion of critical path versus non-critical path items, and it ends up clouding that discussion. And so I feel like that the project teams on UDOT's side don't feel the flexibility to move those days at all, and if they do, it's an act of Congress, so to speak.
I get a question, because I get, my jobs, I don't have this issue too much, but I get calls from a lot of small contractors that get hammered when they bid in their incentive. A change happens, and the RE doesn't give them the incentive at the end because a change happened and time gets all messed up. So I don't know if that's an issue out there. If there is, I'm kind of curious if it is, and how everybody else is kind of dealing with that. And do you show it in your schedule so everybody knows? I mean, that's kind of how I've kind of directed these guys, is when you put it in your baseline, making sure it's in your narrative, it's in your schedule, so everybody knows that is the case.
So your question is accounting for time incentive when there's like change orders or change conditions, those kind of things. Okay, do you still get the incentive even with those change orders, or does it just get washed away, so to speak? How are others dealing with that? How are others dealing with change conditions with price plus time?
We had a fairly intricate job just this year that had several time segments on it. And so that raises the challenges to look at elements that weighed into it, but for us, at least our attitude has always been that if there's an item of work that's caused the critical path to extend, we add it in, and we try and add in the days that causes. The question may arise, is it really critical path stuff or not? There's an opportunity either direction to be a benefit more to the owner to less time, or to the contractor to more time, depending on that decision. But we've always certainly been willing to just say, show us the critical path and how it affected the critical path, and as long as it does, we're extending time, and by doing that, the incentive comes along with. And so if you end up, and so in the end, on one segment, they didn't get anything, but in overall, they did get another one because we added time and it just shook out that way. So I don't really see that being a problem. The bigger issue that we faced was just you had weather days, and it was a tight work zone, and you had different subs on top of each other, and one sub's work is affected, and that ends up affecting the other sub's ability to do his work, which wasn't added work, it just affected his window when to do it. And so you kind of have to work through those, but we've always taken the attitude, as long as you can show us two schedules, one just before and one after with the impact, we see that as critical path extension, and those are the days that we add to the time, and I don't have any qualms at all doing that.
I think where we see this getting foggy is you have language in there, and I'll bring up third-party utility companies, cooperate or coordinate with third-party utility companies. You know, we got 3 to 4 weeks to bid these jobs. To go around to every utility company and say, how long is this going to take you to move? That's a tough one. I don't know if any of you all are, I'm sure you are, experiencing the same things, but you know, when we don't have the hammer over them and we're not paying the check, it's really hard to coordinate and or cooperate with them at times. And I mean, I'll throw Union Pacific in there also. With UTA's new, you know, one Form B for 100+ miles of track, it becomes difficult at times. And that can get a gray area with the scheduling and critical path, because, you know, at bid time and even the pre-construction meeting, the best you can do is hope to get them all there during that meeting and, you know, pull the blanket off right then and there. If you don't, more often than not, you're going to get into these delays. So I was just curious to see if any of you all have seen that.
I'm going to throw Betty under the bus here a little bit. She's got a great example of a project just like that I think it was a good partnering atmosphere where we were able to work through a lot of these utility delays, and let her talk to it.
I like that, Brandon.
I'm like Shane, I really don't like talking in front of people. We had a job, and it's actually a little bit unique for a UDOT job, is that it had dates when the utility agreements were supposed to be in place, which was a few days after bid opening. And in addition to that, it had durations for the third-party utilities to complete their work. Well, when we met with all these utilities a couple weeks prior to starting the contract, for the most part, some of the agreements were not in place yet. None of them had hired contractors. Some of them were still in design phase. So with what was in the contract, we had them as all early action items to start work and, you know, get out of the way so we could proceed with the work. And needless to say, instead of being done middle of March per our schedule and what was in the contract, I think they were finally out of there in early July. So a significant delay to the project. We were able to work with UDOT and get a time extension. The biggest issue was compensable or non-compensable, because they consider third-party utilities as non-compensable. And yet it's a significant delay, and the only thing that really saved us on that issue was that we also had additional water line work added that was on the critical path that actually took most of that time. But the compensable, non-compensable on the third party when you have no control is probably the biggest issue, because you have legitimate costs. You are out there, you have traffic control, you have all those issues. You still have an office, you still have people on the project, all those things are delayed and are a true cost throughout that entire time. And, you know, and there's really, you have no control.
I will give you an update on the third party is with the 2017 specs. That is one of the things that we're looking at as a fairness issue. Your point's well taken that how do you have control over them? I think with this new administrative rule that's been written, I think we will have more control over them, but we are looking at options there to rewrite that particular spec and look at some fairness there, because I think in the past that that's something that we, in a partnering gesture UDOT wide, I think we owe it to the contractors to take a look at that again and see if there are some things that we can do to make that more equitable.
On the schedule side too, with critical path, I think there's the understanding that the float is owned by the project, and this becomes a challenge when with design changes or change orders or other things that are done outside of the control of the contractor, that float is used. Well, now we don't have it anymore either, and now very often we're put in a situation at the end of the job where we have no float anymore. Everything becomes critical path essentially, and you're trying to rush to get the job done, and now you're looking at liquidated damages. And so, I think as we work together on these different situations on projects, we have to, just because it's not critical path initially, doesn't mean it doesn't become that, and it doesn't mean that, the non-critical path items aren't super important and very hard to finish, and they may end up being the ones that cause delay with subs as we push subs off and things like that. And so we have had good experience with the bonus. We've worked with great people in Region 4 that have helped work through those issues, and we've had other projects that aren't quite as easy as that. And so they're just because it's not critical path doesn't mean it doesn't influence the project. And I think too often everybody's like, well, it's not critical path, that's your problem. Well, it is, and we know it is our problem, but it also influences other items on the job.
Maybe add two thoughts I've had while we've been sitting here. This near critical is definitely something that I think Josh, myself, Anna, Rob will all take a look at. We've been on those complex projects in the past where you see that critical path change from month to month as there's a number of activities that are very close to one another, and if one of those is affected, it switches back to and it moves. On a straight, I'm going to say, paving job, it's a little different. There is one activity. So we definitely need to look at scale on this. Those of you that may not know, we are writing a change management spec, and I think this will fall directly in line with that spec, as well as those that have the payment ties for compensable and non-compensable. I appreciate that you guys have brought this part of the discussion up. The other side of this that I kind of had while we were talking utilities, I want to make sure I shared with this group is, if you haven't looked at R930-8, the new utility law, go ahead and take a look at that administrative rule. It gives us a lot more teeth, as Rob said, a lot more ability if we follow our roles and responsibilities. A lot of that is going to come down to documentation, early involvement, difficulty that we've all struggled in getting a third party to commit to a schedule. We're going to have to learn some tools of, as per our conversation, as per the pre-construction meeting, these things were identified and discussed, a commitment to complete this by the end of June. We document, we write that, we send it to the utility company. Some of those things that we maybe haven't been, I'm gonna say, as proactive, we really need to make sure we iron out what would be upheld and what wouldn't. And Richard Manser's gonna help work with that. We're gonna come out with some additional instruction. But definitely, I'm going to say, don't think of that as this blanket that covers us in all situations unless we can check those boxes. And we can say, yes, I have records where I show they were in attendance, they committed to these items, and for whatever reason, we weren't that high of a priority and they didn't show up on the job this day or this day or this day. If we don't have that document trail, we may stay in the realm that we've been in. So it puts a lot on us, both on our crews to be documenting this, on the REs to be ensuring that those invitations are sent to the right people, that they've confirmed that they will be to those meetings, and that follow-up is there. I'm not gonna say that we don't have egg on our face from day one on this anyway, that there are a lot of times we assume when we send that email that has the invite list, they receive it, that it goes outside of our firewall and they've received it. So I just ask that we are very conscientious of that and don't maybe use this as a knife to them, that we have projects back to back to back with these third-party utility companies, that there's a relationship there to maintain, and we don't often umbrella them in that partnering environment, and that's where a change may need to occur as well. That how do we develop that relationship with the UPs and the UTAs, that we have a coordination cycle on a Form B, that if Form B isn't being used in Utah County on a given day, we can use it in Salt Lake County, and how does that notification procedure occur? I think we have some unique challenges to open those doors, that sometimes we stop when we see the doors shut and we don't find a way to knock or ring the doorbell or get a communication through. So just kind of throw that out there for all of us to think of, what can we do different than what we've always done?
I think at the pre-construction meeting, it's too late. I think it needs to happen during design, so that we know how to bid the project. Because we've already bid the project at the pre-construction meeting, those timeframes may not jive with our assumptions.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I was emphatically told that there is a PDN for that, so we will be pressuring pre-construction to ensure that those conversations have been made, the calls have been made, the notification of advertising has been made, notification at bid award. All of those notifications fall on the pre-construction side, but our challenge is making sure that handoff is clean and we know the status at construction.
Everybody knows what a Form B is, right? It's the permission to work in UTA's right-of-way. So if you didn't know.
I have a schedule question. When you have, say you have a project that's 100 days and you want to have 10 days of bonus or incentive, whatever you want to call it, what baseline schedule do you turn in? A baseline schedule with 100 days showing what you bid, or do you put a baseline schedule in with your assumed 10 days of incentive? Because that can be taken as float. I think some REs are viewing that as well. You gave me a schedule, yeah, you're showing 10 days of incentive. However, this delay happened, it pushed these activities off, pushed you out 5 days, you're still not finishing late, you may not get your assumed bonus. I look at a lot of schedules with my process reviews, and some baselines are the baselines with their assumed incentive. Some baselines are kicked all the way out to the days that they bid, and there doesn't seem to be a standard way to bid it. What are your guys' thoughts on how you do that?
I guess as the project controls engineer, I'll take the first crack at that one. I asked Anna to answer it. She shook it off. The short answer to that is both. And the two schedules actually should have very little difference, except there should be one additional activity that shows incentive, getting to what Todd was saying. But you need to submit the one showing the constrained anticipated incentive, and then one that's showing that 10-day early completion. The important thing here is, as you go through, you need to do the monthly updates. And I think that's something that we've seen this year, that we get a baseline, and then there's a change that happens 4 months later, and then every duration's different, things are resequenced, and you can't follow the logic. And that's where stuff gets really, really complicated. So that monthly update procedure really helps justify whether that was a near critical path became critical because of a quantity overrun. That can show the additional duration that's required and justify adding more time and not actually just consuming that shared float. A good schedule can help you document all of the stuff that we've just talked about. The thing is it needs to be submitted monthly, and I don't want to get to the point, a schedule is not a claims tool primarily, right? A schedule should be a tool to build the job. That's what it is, right? It's not insurance. It's a tool to build the job. And I think that's something we've really looked at there's now a Schedule Light specification. It still requires a baseline. It still requires monthly updates. It doesn't have to be in P6. I mean, on a simple job, I can make a baseline schedule in Excel, as many of you can, that does exactly the same thing, but conveys that same information, shows the early completion, shows how near critical paths can. So again, if you're doing the incentive thing, you should honestly submit 2 schedules. Again, the only difference is you add one more activity showing that anticipated early completion in the incentive and show that as that 10-day duration. And then, again, as monthly change happens, durations extend, shorten, and you're working through an as-built schedule, you can show how that change affected it and when your criticals change the path. Does that answer the question? Was that way more than you wanted to know?
Well, the other question I have is that 10-day incentive. Some REs are viewing it as float. Some REs are saying, okay, we're going to look at your critical path and we'll give you a time extension so you can still earn your incentive. On the flip side, if you have a critical item and it increases in scope or quantity and you want to do a linear feet per day or something, there's actually a benefit to the contractor to having the schedule out to the full 100 days because each activity now takes longer and their production rate is slower, and so they'll get more days on their time extension if you base it on a production rate of the full length schedule versus what they're going to finish early. So I think it would be nice just to have a standard of either show, I understand you want to show how you're going to build it, but if that baseline is just, these are the days here when I bid the project and I bid this number of days when it's awarded, this is the schedule I put together to get to those days. And then if they, want to put extra resources and finish early, but if there's critical items, yeah, we need to give them time, I think it's fair that they get incentive if there's something out of their control. But it gets muddy when you have two different durations on all the activities. You could have some stuff on critical path to finish early, but then if it carries out to the full length, those items may not be critical anymore.
Those are the pros and cons of both scheduling ideas. I mean, absolutely, you can show the full duration and keep the float in lower production rates, or you can show it as an incentive, but then you run that risk of having the monthly update and how production rates really shake out.
The other question on schedules that we struggle with is it a schedule for payment or is it a schedule for construction? And the way that we use and interpret the spec at this point is it's mostly for payment. And so it's cumbersome. I mean, you certainly build it, as close to what you're going to build as you can, but it's not as nimble as it could be, and so that's a challenge maybe we need to discuss and put on the agenda and try to overcome, just because most of them now are a function of payment. And so that's why the 4 months later you're using it only to get paid, and unfortunately our project teams aren't using them enough to build the work.
And let's be honest, Primavera is not an accounting tool.
Right.
It can be used with significant effort.
It's difficult.
To do that, but it's not an accounting tool, to be completely honest. It should be a tool to help build the job.
Right.
And again, it can be used if you have the resources and time, but a majority of the jobs do not have the resources nor the time to do that.
Yeah, we don't have 8 or 10 schedulers back at the office doing that, and so it's our project manager trying to do the schedule in addition to everything else.
Part of the challenge is the schedule spec is really written in the favor of the department. It's pretty heavy-handed, and unless you have a schedule guru, strategist, looking at every angle, like there's questions about how you show they're critical and how you show the incentive and so forth, that the department lines up their schedule expert, and it becomes a contest of who's better at scheduling, and who, if you didn't see every potential problem ahead of time and build all of that into the schedule, it can really work against you. And I feel like the contractor's fairly disadvantaged in the schedule spec in general.
Do I hear a rebuttal to that, or?
I will not rebut that, I'll add to it. I appreciate the comments that have been said about near critical items. That changes throughout the life of project comment. That was my comment. Question, I appreciate the thoughts on third-party utilities and adding their schedule and timeframes into a project. A challenge that we often see is, I'll just use an example. Say we have 180 days to build a job. We'll go to the utility and the utility will say, well, I need 200 days to move that utility. And so I'd like to hear from the department. What is the department doing to help get a reasonable construction time frame from these utilities?
Do you want to answer the first one, Josh, or the second one, or? I'll go for the second one, and then you can answer the first one if you want. The second one, as I talked about, we're not there yet. This rule is a step in the right direction to, force the utilities to come up and participate with us as a partner. Now, you understand also the utilities have a lot of pressure. This isn't their main work that they're doing. This is something that we've put on them, and so to schedule their crews, it's pretty tough. But what that means is we've got to step up earlier and get those schedules. This is the expected, the anticipated work time that's going to take for this particular utility. So you don't get into that situation where you show up on the job and they say, here's a 180-day job and we need 200 days. We're hoping to avoid that by early coordination with utilities. So, excuse me, we're not there yet, but this rule is a step in the right direction, and the process that will follow the rule that we're putting into place will take care of some of that. Utilities has been a struggle for many, many years, and that's probably been, it's not going to go away completely, but we're hoping to minimize the impact by early coordination and getting those durations up beforehand.
On, Scott, to answer your question, the schedule, again, getting back, is a tool for the group. I really don't want to call myself a scheduling expert compared to some of the people in the room, Aaliyah, and others. It should be a tool that we use together. And these concerns that are brought up, I'm happy to sit down with your team and the resident engineer and discuss these nuances up front so everybody has that base understanding. I know Anna has done this on a couple of jobs already this year. Sit down and bring these concerns up early on. This is just another risk on the risk register, right? Because there's certain activities that are going to happen. And let's have these conversations early before they become too late and you're in a fighting situation. And have the understanding, we know schedules are going to change. No project goes 100% perfectly, but everybody still needs to have that plan of how the work is anticipated to progress, right? That's how you schedule your crews, your subs, our inspection powers to be there to support those timeframes. But again, it should be a tool that we work together for that early completion. So if anything, I would love to see more people discussing schedules and just getting those conversations occurring earlier so everybody has that understanding before it's too late. But it shouldn't be a tool to beat each other over the head with. It should be a tool so we can all finish early. And I'm taking it that's not necessarily the way it's actually occurring out on site. And I don't know that I know how to answer that.
If you've been in that situation, you know what I'm talking about. There are people in this room that understand what I'm talking about. It sounds like just complaining, but if you've been there,
it gets down to partnering, Scott. It's the same with any of these other items, is we've got to look at this, and what you just said, we've got to look at this as not us against them, but as a team to put this together. And fairness needs to be brought into play here. And my idea of fair and your idea of fair may be a little bit different, by the way. But I think trying to walk in the other person's shoes for a while and try to have some understanding, it goes a long way. And we could talk about 100 different issues, and the solution to them is partnering through them, and in the true partnering sense. And so I don't know what to say, Scott. I hear you, and we can do some things to the schedule spec, but in the end, I think it gets down to partnering through some of these items, and that's why partnering was kind of the top of the list today, was to talk about that. And it means different things to different people, but maybe it's always good to refresh that, to put situations and scenarios out there, train people, but you're right, it's not us against them, it's all of us together, and that's why part of the reason for this meeting today is that exactly. So,
Just a couple other things to add here. I wish that we could say that just like zero fatalities, we have a zero right-of-way, zero utility goal. That goal does exist silently in the pre-construction side, but I think that as we internally do our constructability reviews and we staff people to help us do those reviews, it is a great opportunity to say, on this project, we need advanced utility relocation. We're good on the big jobs doing that. We're maybe not as great on some of the smaller jobs, but we will always have the unknown factor of we're out there digging in a trench and we come across a utility that's 12 inches down that we thought was not even in the location that we were working in. That unknown will always happen. At that point in time, we're going to have to find out whose utility is, engage them in that conversation, and still have those, I'm going to say, surprises to work through. But I think the whole purpose of our relationship, of this partnering effort, is to limit those surprises, to involve people up front early, to talk through schedules, to bring a utility company in and say, okay, I know you've already put an estimate together on this project. Here's our plan of events, here's our sequence. So when we get the invoices back from the utility company, it includes the contractor staging of the work, rather than we're still getting surprised at the end with double and triple cost invoices that we have no control over. If we can add that to our risk registers and include that in our utility kickoff discussions with those utility owners, they can say, oh, now I know he's just not going to do one side switch and do the other side. There's some other constrictions here. I need additional mob. I need some pole holding trucks. I need whatever it is. Resubmit those invoices and prices up front, and any adjustments and costs can be made early on. Those are all those challenges that, construction's not simple. One of our themes internally is always simplify processes, simplify roles, simplify what we're working on. And I wish it came down to saying, well, let's just go with zero. Let's not have any utilities or any right-of-way issues when we get out there on the grade. It would be an awesome utopia, if you will. But I think it falls back to how do we all be team players solving the solutions together and taking pieces in it. Maybe in a certain team environment, UDOT has a better relationship with one of those utility companies than the contractor does. Or on the flip side, a contractor just got off of a project working really well with that utility company. To find our strengths as team players and build off of those strengths. That's probably an extension of partnering, that we don't always look at what is our flexibility in our roles. Can we go in united together and have those conversations? So those were the things I thought of as this discussion's been going back and forth.
all right, thank you. We're about out of time. Is there any final comments before Scott has one. Scott, I missed you before.
I've been dying to get in here. I just wanted to answer your question. For me, I want to see what you really intend as you build your schedule, and so I would want to see you put that incentive at the end, because as I look at schedules for time-related change orders, I'm looking at how the substantial completion date moved. And if you've shown your substantial completion date at the end of the project, I'm assuming you really didn't intend incentive, you just hoped for it. And therefore, that's the date I'm comparing against. And I appreciate as you build the one that shows incentive toward the end, you're showing shorter durations on all your other activities. And as I look at things that arose on a project that caused it to be delayed, I'm going to compare that work activity duration you're showing. So it does play into that, but I'm just trying to be fair to you. And I'm saying, you said you thought you could do this, and when you put that duration together, you assumed there's risk for how quick or how slow that duration might really go, and it ended up with you establishing what you picked, and you put in the substantial completion date that you did. And so I would think, at least from my standpoint, I would hope you'd put that substantial completion date with the incentive showing toward the end, so that I can use that as a primary tool to justify additional time to you because of the changed duration, recognizing that I will look at that shorter duration and say, well, that impact didn't cause it to change, if that should be the case. But I do appreciate the 3-week look ahead, or the 4-week look ahead, or the 5-week look ahead Excel spreadsheet schedules that most contractors are giving us nowadays. It's a lot more meaningful to me in the weekly coordination meeting, week to week to week, including some that will show the week prior in addition to the 3 or 4 weeks ahead. That's very helpful to us to see how valid those durations are that go into the CPM schedule. And frequently, for me, I only need the CPM schedule updated if there's a change, and I need you to show where the CPM was tracking ahead of the change, and then another one that has the change in it. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Scott. All right, just to wrap this up, I think we've established that we've made a lot of progress in the things that we've been doing. We're not done. There's always going to be issues, and the thing that I would like to say is like we've mentioned throughout the session today, is working together. And this is a team effort. It's not UDOT doing this and the contractors doing that. I like to think of it as a team, and that's the way that we should be looking at this as we continue forward. And if you do have any of us, we're willing to listen. We are absolutely willing to listen. Please give us a call. Anybody on my staff, any of our REs, I would hope that we would be open to discussions and concerns, and try to work through those and make sure that we're really meeting the goals that we have of getting projects constructed with quality, safely, and timely. So thank you for being here. Please give a hand to our panel here, and thanks for coming.